Oh my God!
You wake up before sunrise, in a bedroll damp on the outside and none too dry inside, and the first sound you hear is your horse shifting its weight 20 feet away. It heard you stir before you did. For the next 3 months, that horse is the closest thing you have to a co-worker. The bunkhouse, the crew, the radio that reaches somebody, all of it sits 100 miles behind you. Just you, a few hundred cattle, fenceless land, and one question nobody warns you about beforehand. Can you stand your own company for 90 straight days? Coffee first. It's the one ritual that survives everything else. You've got a blackened pot, a fire you build with whatever dry wood you scavenged the night before, and grounds you'll reuse until they're basically flavoring the water. Ranchers on the old cattle drives ground almost 2 pounds of coffee a day for a full crew, and even alone, you go through more than you'd admit to anyone back home. The caffeine barely matters. What you're really after is the 10 minutes where the day hasn't started yet, when the silence still feels like company instead of a warning. Then the work starts, and the work never really stops being about food. Not just yours. Your job is keeping a few hundred animals alive on grass that isn't always there and water that isn't always where you left it. You load salt onto a pack horse and haul it out to wherever the herds decided to wander. Because cattle need it in the heat, or they stop eating right. You ride the range, checking for the ones that are limping, coughing, or dragging behind, because on a spread this size, a sick animal that goes unnoticed for a week is a dead animal by the time you find it again. Your own meals are a different kind of math. Whatever's in the saddlebag, or the small propane fridge back at the line shack, is what you get. Think canned beans, salt pork, maybe a chunk of something that used to be steak before 3 days without ice got to it. The old chuck wagon crews at least had a cook. Charles Goodnight built the first proper chuck wagon back in 1866, a converted army surplus wagon with a fold-down cookbox and a water barrel, specifically because feeding a crew off nothing but a saddlebag wasn't working even with 10 or 12 men splitting the labor. You don't get that luxury. You're the cook, the wrangler, and the only customer, and you're not particularly good at any of the three, and there's nobody around to complain to about that but the horse, who doesn't care either way. Bread is its own project. No bakery within 100 miles means you either learn to work a sourdough starter or you live on hardtack and regret. The old trail cooks kept their starter wrapped against their body in cold weather, so the culture wouldn't die overnight. You do the same thing now, half out of practicality and half because it's the closest thing to caretaking you get to do out here. And there's something almost funny about babying a jar of fermenting flour, like it's the one dependent you've got left. There's also the gear, because out here your equipment is the only backup you've got. A cinch that frays and snaps 20 miles from camp isn't an inconvenience. It's the difference between riding home and walking home. So you check leather every morning, the way some people check their phones, running your thumb along the stitching, looking for the fray that's about to become a problem. You carry a small kit of wire, leather punches, and whatever spare rope you can spare the weight for, and you learn to fix things you never expected to need fixing, because the nearest hardware store might as well be on the moon. By early afternoon, the heat's doing its own kind of damage. Your lips crack. Your hands, already rope-burned and sun-dark, start to feel like leather that's been left out too long, because that's basically what's happening to them. You keep working anyway. There's no sick day out here, no supervisor to call. If you don't check the fence line and the water gaps, nobody does. But the heat isn't the part that breaks people. Ask anyone who's actually worked a line camp, and they'll tell you the real problem shows up after dark. Nightfall changes the math completely. The temperature can drop 40 degrees between sundown and midnight, depending on where you're camped. And the same open sky that made the day feel enormous now makes the dark feel bottomless. You bank the fire, you check the horse's picket line twice because a spooked animal in the night means you're now on foot in the middle of nowhere, and you climb into a bedroll that's colder than it was this morning. Cowboys on the old winter camps described frozen moustaches and boots stiff as boards by the time they thawed out near the fire. You're not dealing with that exact winter, not this trip, but you understand the instinct behind it. The cold doesn't care that you're tired. Weather out here doesn't announce itself the way it does on a phone screen back home. There's no app buzzing a warning. You read the sky instead, the way generations of riders before you had to, watching a build of dark cloud on the horizon and doing quick math about how far you are from shelter. A storm that would just mean a delayed commute in the city can mean real danger out on open ground. Lightning with nothing tall around to draw it but you and your horse. Hail that can bruise cattle and rider alike. You learn to respect a sky that's turning fast, because respect is the only insurance policy you've got. Sleep out here isn't really sleep, not the kind you get in a bed.
It's closer to a series of interruptions you eventually get used to. A coyote calls somewhere off to the west and your body goes rigid before your brain catches up. The horse snorts and you're awake, checking. Somewhere around week 3, you stop flinching at every sound. Not because you've gotten braver, but because you've started to recognize which ones matter and which ones are just the range talking to itself at night. Theodore Roosevelt understood this better than his New York upbringing would suggest. In 1884, grieving after losing his wife and his mother on the same day, he bought a ranch in the North Dakota badlands and moved out there, 35 miles from the nearest town, with his closest neighbor roughly 10 or 12 miles off in either direction. He wasn't playing cowboy for a photograph. He built fence, broke horses, and rode roundup like everyone else on his crew, and by his own account, the isolation and the physical grind did something to him that New York never could. Years later, he'd say, the man he became in those badlands was the man who ended up in the White House. Then came the winter that ended it. The winter of 1886 into 1887 hit the northern plains so hard that ranchers lost somewhere between 60 and 75% of their cattle to the cold. Carcasses stacked up along the buttes for weeks after the thaw. Roosevelt lost most of his herd. He'd built a life out there, and in a single season, the range took it back. That's the part people forget when they romanticize this work. The land doesn't owe you anything for showing up. You're not fighting a historic blizzard on this stretch. But every solo rider inherits some version of that same math, where the work you do today doesn't guarantee anything about tomorrow, and the animals you're responsible for can undo 3 months of effort in a single bad week. So you keep checking water, you keep counting heads, you keep riding the line, even when nothing's obviously wrong, because out here, obviously wrong usually means it's already too late. Hygiene becomes a joke you tell yourself. There's a creek if you're lucky, and if you're not, there's a bucket and whatever nerve it takes to bathe in water that's one step above freezing. You wear the same shirt for longer than you'd admit, and eventually you stop noticing, because there's nobody around whose opinion matters. The old trail cooks called beans prairie strawberries because that's what they had, day after day. And by week 6, you understand exactly why a man might start joking about his own dinner. It's either that or go quiet. And silence, real silence, is where this whole thing turns into something different than hard labor. The physical part, the heat, the cold, the sore back, you can push through that. People have been pushing through that for 150 years. What actually gets to a solo rider is the stretch around the 2-month mark, when the novelty's worn off completely and the isolation stops feeling like freedom and starts feeling like something closer to a sentence. Line riders in the old camps had a phrase for it. Living and working alone for months on end could make a man a little teched in the head, and the ones who shared a line shack with a partner counted themselves lucky for exactly that reason. You don't get a partner. You get a horse that's good company but bad conversation, and a radio that picks up nothing but static past a certain ridge. Some days you talk out loud just to hear a human voice, even if it's your own. You catch yourself narrating what you're doing, like there's an audience, because some part of your brain apparently needs one.
That's not weakness. That's just what 90 days of your own head sounds like when nobody interrupts it. The strange part is how the isolation sneaks up on you instead of arriving all at once. Week 1, it feels like a vacation from everyone. Week 4, you notice you've started having full conversations with the horse and you've stopped being embarrassed about it. Week 8, the silence stops being empty and starts being loud, if that makes any sense at all. Your own thoughts get louder because there's nothing else competing for the space. Old arguments replay themselves. Regrets you'd buried under a normal, noisy life climb back out and sit with you at the fire.
Some riders say that's the actual test of a line camp, not whether you can handle the cold or the work, but whether you can sit across from your own mind for 3 months straight without flinching. This is the part nobody puts on the postcard. The sunsets, the wide open country, the horse silhouetted against the ridge at dusk. All of it looks incredible from a truck window and feels like a different thing entirely when that horse is the only living creature who's heard your voice in 4 days. The labour's not what costs you here. What actually costs you is what 3 months of your own company does to the inside of your head, and whether you come out the other side of that quieter or steadier or just different. Because here's what actually happens to the people who make it through a full stretch like this. They don't come back bragging about toughness, they come back changed, in a way that's hard to explain to anyone who's never sat with silence that long. Roosevelt said, "The Badlands gave him something New York never could." The modern line riders who do this for a living will tell you something similar, in fewer words and probably with more cursing. The range doesn't just test your body, it empties you out and hands you back whatever's left once the noise is gone. So if you're wondering whether you'd last 3 months alone out there, the honest answer is you don't find out until you're already 40 miles from the nearest fence, with a horse that doesn't talk back and a silence that isn't going anywhere. Some people find exactly who they are in that quiet. Some people find out they can't stand what's actually in their own head once nobody else is around to drown it out. Which one would you turn out to be?